Try to imagine nothing. Go ahead. Close your eyes and try to visualize absolute emptiness. You probably see a black void, maybe some stars in the distance if you're feeling romantic, but essentially you picture a vacuum. You think of space as a stage, a big empty box where stuff happens. You put a planet here, a star there, maybe a confused astronaut floating in the middle. But the space itself, to you, it's just the container. It's the absence of things. I hate to break it to you, but that container doesn't exist. The idea of empty space is the greatest hallucination of the human mind. The universe isn't a box, it's a glob of jello. Okay, maybe not literal lime-flavored gelatin, but physically speaking, you are walking through a medium that is constantly being twisted, squashed, and pulled. When you look at the air in front of you, or the vacuum of space, you aren't looking at nothing. You are looking at a field. And until you understand what a field is, you don't understand physics. You're just memorizing rules for a game you don't know how to play. Let's start with something you can actually touch. Imagine a big, wobbling block of elastic material, a giant cube of jello sitting on a table. Now, suppose I reach in, grab a tiny speck of dirt trapped inside that jello, and I pull it. The jello distorts. It stretches. If you want to describe what happened to that block, you can't just say, it moved. That's lazy. You have to describe how every single point inside that block shifted relative to every other point. We call this strain. If I pull the corner, the middle moves a little, the far side moves barely at all, and the point under my finger moves a lot. To describe this mess, we need numbers, a lot of numbers. For every tiny point in that jello, we need to know how much it stretched sideways, how much it stretched upwards, and how much it stretched forward. And it gets worse. We need to know if it twisted. Did the top slide right while the bottom slid left? That's a shear. Suddenly, this innocent block of jello is a mathematical nightmare. To fully describe the stress and strain inside it, we can't just use a single arrow. We need a concept called a tensor, a beast of a mathematical object that packages all these stretches and twists together. But here's the beautiful part. This isn't just about jello. This is how the entire universe works. Physics is the business of assigning numbers to points in space. That's it. That's the job. If you assign a single number to every point in space, like, say, the temperature, you have what we call a scalar field. Imagine a block of metal that's hot on one side and cold on the other. You can close your eyes and point to any spot inside that metal, and there is a specific number waiting for you, 20 degrees. Move an inch left, 25 degrees. The temperature doesn't jump around randomly. It changes smoothly. It forms a landscape. Now, imagine drawing lines connecting all the points that have the exact same temperature. You get these invisible surfaces, like the contour lines on a topographic map. We call them isotherms. They are imaginary, but they tell you the shape of the heat. But a single number isn't enough for the interesting stuff. Sometimes, the universe has an arrow at every point. Think about a rotating object, or water flowing in a river. At every single point in that river, the water has a speed, but it also has a direction. It's going somewhere. You can't just say, the water is moving at 5 miles per hour. You have to say, 5 miles per hour downstream. This is a vector field. Imagine the room you are sitting in right now. The air seems still, but it isn't. There are tiny currents everywhere. If you could freeze time and attach a tiny little red arrow to every molecule of air showing where it was going, the room would look like a porcupine. That forest of arrows is a field. Heat flow works the same way. Heat doesn't just sit there. It flows from the hot spots to the cold spots. So, superimposed over your map of temperature numbers, there is a map of heat flow arrows. And here is the rule. The heat arrow always points downhill. It wants to get away from the hot zone as fast as possible. Now, we need a way to connect these two things, the temperature numbers and the flow arrows. How do we find out which way the heat will flow just by looking at the temperature map? We use a mathematical machine. We call it del, which is just a fancy name for a symbol that acts like a meat grinder for functions. You feed it the map of temperatures, and it chews it up and spits out a map of arrows. This operation is called the gradient, and it is exactly what it sounds like. If you are standing on a hillside in the pitch dark and you want to know which way is up, you feel around with your feet. You find the direction where the slope is steepest. That direction is the gradient. The gradient of the temperature tells you the direction of the hottest change. It tells you, if you want to get hotter, go that way. And the heat flow? It simply obeys the opposite of the gradient. It runs down the hill. But nature isn't satisfied with just flowing down hills. Sometimes nature likes to spin. Imagine you have a field of arrows that looks like a whirlpool. The arrows aren't flowing out from a center, they are circling around it. If you dropped a leaf in there, it wouldn't just move, it would rotate. To measure this swirliness, we use another operation called the curl. If the gradient measures the slope of the hill, the curl measures how much the field is twisting. It tells you the rotation. And then there's the divergence. This measures how much the stuff is spreading out. If you have a nozzle spraying water, the divergence is high at the nozzle because water is exploding outward. If you have a drain, the divergence is negative because water is vanishing into it. Why am I telling you about hills, swirls, and drains? Because these three concepts, gradient, curl, and divergence, are the language of reality. Maxwell's equations, the laws that govern light, electricity, are just sentences written in this language. They say things like, the divergence of the electric field is the charge. Translation, electric charge is a sprayer that shoots electric field arrows outward. Or, the divergence of the magnetic field is zero. Translation, there are no magnetic sprayers, no magnetic charges. Magnetic lines never start or stop. They just loop forever. Speaking of magnetism, this is where things get really weird. You think you know what magnetism is. You played with magnets as a kid. You know they stick to the fridge and hate each other if you flip them around. But have you ever asked why? Why does a wire carrying an electric current suddenly turn into a magnet? Let's look at the force on a moving charge. We call it the Lorentz force. It's the rule that says if you shoot a charged particle through a magnetic field, it gets pushed sideways. Not forward, not backward, sideways. It's a force that acts perpendicular to the motion. That's bizarre. Gravity pulls you down. Electrical attraction pulls you closer. But magnetism pushes you sideways, like a rude pedestrian shoving you into traffic. The standard explanation involves the right-hand rule. You hold up your hand, point your thumb, curl your fingers, and look like you're trying to hail a taxi while doing yoga. It works, but it's arbitrary. Nature doesn't have hands. Here is the truth. Magnetism is not a separate thing. It's just electricity seen from a moving perspective. Imagine a copper wire. Inside, you have positive copper ions fixed in place, and a sea of negative electrons flowing through them like a river. This is the current. Now, imagine a single negative charge moving alongside this wire at the exact same speed as the electrons inside the wire. From your perspective, standing still in the lab, you see a current. You check your rule book and it says, currents create magnetic fields. Okay? The magnetic field pushes the moving charge toward the wire. Simple. But wait. Let's look at it from the perspective of the moving charge. If you are the charge, you are looking at the electrons in the wire, and they look stationary relative to you because you're moving at the same speed. If they are stationary, there is no current. If there is no current, there is no magnetic field. So, if there is no magnetic field, the force disappears, right? The charge should drift away? Wrong. The charge still gets pushed toward the wire. But how? If the magnetic force vanished, what is pushing it?
Einstein steps in. You see, when things move, space itself contracts. It squishes. This is special relativity. From the perspective of our moving charge, the positive ions in the wire, which were stationary in the lab, are now rushing backward. Because they are moving, the distance between them shrinks. They get packed denser. Meanwhile, the electrons in the wire, which are moving with us, appear stationary. Their spacing relaxes. They spread out. Do you see what just happened? The wire, which used to be electrically neutral, now has a higher density of positive charges and a lower density of negative charges. To the moving particle, the wire has suddenly become positively charged. It's not magnetism pulling the particle in, it's good old-fashioned electric attraction. The particle sees a positively charged wire and wants to hug it. So, what we call a magnetic field in the lab is just an electric field disguised by relativity. It's what happens to electricity when you start moving. This connects back to our vector fields. We said earlier that fields define the force on a charge. We have an electric field vector and a magnetic field vector. What we just discovered is that these aren't two different actors. They are the same actor changing costumes depending on how fast you run past the stage. If you stand still, you see electricity. If you run, you see a mix of electricity and magnetism. They are components of one giant four-dimensional object, the electromagnetic field. But there is a catch. To make this work, charge has to be indestructible. Think about the conservation of charge. It's a fancy way of saying charge is conserved. You can't create electrons out of nothing, and you can't make them vanish. If a current flows out of a box, the amount of charge inside the box must go down. It's basically accounting. If charge wasn't conserved, if it could change depending on your speed, the whole universe would break. Imagine heating up a block of metal. The electrons speed up. If their charge changed because of that speed, the block would suddenly become electrically charged just because it got hot. Massive sparks would fly every time you made toast. Since your toaster doesn't kill you, usually, we know charge is an invariant scalar. It's the same number no matter how fast you go. Now, let's go back to those magnetic field lines. Remember, the divergence of the magnetic field is zero. No magnetic charges. This means magnetic field lines have to form closed loops. They are like rubber bands that never break. If you have a straight wire, the field lines circle around it. If you have a loop of wire, the field lines thread through the middle and wrap around the outside, looking like a donut. This creates the magnetic dipole. It's the basic unit of magnetism. You don't have a north pole and a south pole sitting separately. You have a loop. The north is just the side where the lines come out, and the south is where they go in. But here is a question that should bother you. Where do the lines go when they hit the end of a bar magnet? They don't stop. They go through the magnet. A permanent magnet is just a solenoid that doesn't need a battery. Inside that iron bar, billions of tiny electrons are spinning. Each spinning electron is a tiny current loop. In iron, these loops decide to line up and sing in the same choir. The result is a macroscopic magnetic field. So there is no magic magnetic fluid inside the iron. It's just currents, permanent atomic currents that never stop flowing. But we are still describing this with lines and loops. Is that what's really there? Are there invisible spaghetti strings filling the room? Of course not. The lines are just a drawing tool. What's really there is something called the vector potential. And this is where we have to abandon the high school pictures entirely and look at the machinery under the floorboards. Because it turns out the magnetic field might just be a shadow of something more fundamental, something we call A. We left off with a cliffhanger. We stripped away the magnetic field lines and realized they are just cartoons. We realized that magnetism and electricity are the same thing, just viewed from different speeds. But if we want to actually predict what the universe will do next, if we want to see the machinery under the floorboards, we need to talk about the ghost. We need to talk about A. In the simple world of electrostatics, life is easy. You have a scalar potential, voltage. It's like height on a topographic map. If you know the voltage everywhere, you just roll the ball down the hill, and that's your electric field. Simple, intuitive. But magnetism is a headache. It doesn't act like a hill. It acts like a whirlpool. It swirls. So we can't represent it with a simple scalar number like height. We need something with direction. We need a vector potential. We call it A. Think of A as the momentum of space itself. Imagine a river. The water is flowing. That flow is A. If you drop a leaf in the river, it moves with the flow. But if you stick a paddle wheel in the river, it spins. That spin, that's the magnetic field. The magnetic field B is just the turbulence that happens around the edges of the flow of A. For a long time, physicists thought A was fake. They thought it was just a bookkeeping trick, a mathematical shortcut to calculate the real magnetic field. But then quantum mechanics came along and ruined the party. It turns out you can shield a particle from the magnetic field completely, hide it behind a lead wall where the magnetic field is zero, and the particle still feels something. It feels the river of A flowing past the wall. The ghost is real. In fact, the ghost is more fundamental than the thing it haunts. The vector potential is the primary fabric of electromagnetism. The magnetic field is just its derivative. Now I want to pivot. We've been talking about fields as if they are these ethereal, magical clouds hanging in the void. But to truly understand the vacuum, you need to stop thinking of it as a cloud. You need to think of it as a solid object. You need to go back to the jello. When engineers study solid materials, steel, concrete, rubber, they use a branch of physics called elasticity. And when we study the vacuum of empty space, we find the exact same mathematics. Consider that glob of jello we talked about. Suppose you twist it and squash it. To describe the internal torture of that jello, you can't just say it's under pressure. Pressure is too simple. It pushes everywhere equally. But in a solid, you can push on one face while pulling on another. You can twist the top while holding the bottom still. We describe this internal mess with a stress tensor. Don't let the words scare you. A tensor is just a box of numbers. If a vector is an arrow, a tensor is a machine that takes an arrow and twists it. The stress tensor tells you exactly how much force is acting on every possible surface inside the material. It tells you, on the top face, we are pushing right. On the side face, we are pulling down. And how does the material respond to this stress? It deforms. We call this strain. If a tiny speck of dust inside the jello moves from point A to point B, that's displacement. But strain is subtler. Strain measures how the neighbors of that speck moved relative to it. Did they get closer? Did they drift apart? Did they rotate around it? This is defined by the strain tensor. It's the map of the distortion. Why am I talking about engineering concepts in a script about the universe? Because energy doesn't care what it's made of. When you squeeze a spring, you store energy. When you shear a block of metal, you store energy. The amount of energy stored depends on a very simple rule. Stress times strain. How hard you push, multiplied by how much it moves. This is true for a rubber band, and it is true for the vacuum of space. An electric field is a stress. A magnetic field is a strain. The empty space between the stars is loaded with potential energy. Stored in the electromagnetic fields exactly like elastic potential energy is stored in a twisted steel beam. This is why light exists. If you kick a block of steel, a wave travels through it. We call it sound. The speed of that sound depends on two things: how stiff the material is, how hard it fights back, and how heavy it is, how hard it is to move. If you kick the vacuum, a wave travels through it. We call it light. And the speed of light? It is determined by the stiffness of the vacuum and the density of the vacuum.
You have probably seen the constants epsilon 0 and mu 0 in physics textbooks. They look like boring numbers. They are not. They are the elastic constants of the vacuum. One tells you how hard space fights back against electric stress, stiffness, and the other tells you how much magnetic inertia it has, density. Light travels at c, not because it's a cosmic speed limit imposed by the police, but because that is the speed of sound in the solid block of nothingness we call the universe. But here is where the analogy gets really fun. Real materials aren't perfect. If you pull a spring too hard, it snaps. Take a piece of blackboard chalk. If you hold the ends and pull, it snaps in half. If you look at the break, it's a clean, flat cut perpendicular to the pull. Why? Because chalk is brittle. It is weak in tension. It cannot handle being pulled apart. But now, take another piece of chalk and twist it. It doesn't snap straight across. It breaks in a spiral at a 45-degree angle. It looks like a corkscrew. Why? You didn't pull it, you twisted it. You applied a shear. But the math of tensors reveals a secret. A shear is just a tension in disguise. When you twist the chalk, you are actually creating a line of maximum tension running at 45 degrees along the surface. The chalk finds this hidden tension and snaps exactly along that line. Nature is full of these hidden mechanisms. The geometry of the stress dictates the geometry of the failure. Does the vacuum of space have a breaking point? Can you pull on the electric field so hard that space itself snaps? In classical physics, no. But in quantum electrodynamics, yes. If you create an electric field strong enough, a critical field, You can literally rip particles out of the vacuum. You can tear the nothing apart and create electrons and positrons out of pure stress. The vacuum isn't just a stage. It's a material that can be stressed until it breaks into matter. So, let's revisit our opening question. What exists between the object? The answer is everything. The quantum vacuum is not empty space. It is a plenum. It is a solid medium. It is a playground of fields described by vectors, scalars, and tensors. It has a temperature. It has a flow. It has stiffness. It has inertia. It has momentum. It can be twisted, sheared, and stressed. It stores energy. It carries waves. Understanding physics isn't about memorizing that gravity pulls or magnets attract. It's about learning to see the invisible scaffolding. It's about realizing that a differential equation isn't just algebra. It's a set of instructions for how the jello wobbles from 1 millimeter to the next. Einstein didn't invent a new language to describe gravity. He just borrowed the language of geology and structural engineering. He looked at the universe and realized that space-time is just a giant, bendable solid, and gravity is just the strain tensor of the cosmos. So, the next time you look at the night sky, don't see emptiness, don't see a void, see the fields, see the tensors stretching and squeezing in the dark, see the huge invisible river of vector potential swirling around every wire and every atom. The universe is a crowded place, and the nothing is the heaviest thing in it.
Never be ashamed to ask simple questions. While many try to look smart, it's often the ones labeled as fools, those who dare to ask silly questions, who uncover truths no one else has the courage to explore. All the great names in history, scientists, entrepreneurs, leaders, and thinkers, have one thing in common: curiosity. It was curiosity that pulled us out of caves and carried us to the stars. It was curiosity that made someone look at fire and wonder, what if I could control this? Every leap in our evolution, every step in our story was born from someone who dared to ask the question others were too afraid to ask. Curiosity is the greatest human talent, the silent engine that turns doubt into discovery, ignorance into knowledge, weakness into power. Now let me ask you something. How many times have you held back from asking a question because you were afraid of being judged? That shame is exactly what keeps most people trapped in mediocrity. If curiosity was strong enough to pull us out of the darkness of prehistory, to help us create language, science, technology, and even explore space, what can it do for your life today? Curiosity is like an eternal flame burning inside of us, but too many let it die out in the name of routine, rush, or the vanity of pretending to know everything. True success isn't about looking smart. It's about having the courage to admit you don't know, and the humility to put yourself in the position of a learner. Now imagine something that could change the way you see the world. Most people just keep repeating ideas, copying opinions, accepting ready-made answers without ever questioning them. It's like they're all walking in a line, staring only at the back of the person in front of them. But the curious refuse to live that way. They step out of line, raise their heads, look around and ask, is there another way? Why is everyone walking in this direction? Pay close attention now, because this is where the power of thinking differently is born. Curiosity frees you from the prison of repetition. While the crowd settles for, this is how it's always been, the curious are guided by a single question. What if it could be different? It's in this small detail that we find the great difference between those who follow and those who lead. Every successful man and woman you admire has this in common. They aren't satisfied with superficial answers. They dig deeper, investigate, explore. They have the courage not to believe the first answer, to doubt what seems obvious, to question even what looks unquestionable. Don't ever accept memorized formulas without deeply understanding why each thing works the way it does. That's the mindset that can revolutionize even what others believe to be absolute truth. The curious think differently because they dare to step out of line, and the curious prosper because they see opportunities that the conformists could never imagine. Think about this. How many fortunes were built by someone who had the courage to ask, why not, when everyone else was saying, it can't be done? That is the power of curiosity applied to independent thinking. Those who follow the crowd only get as far as the crowd is gone. But those who think differently, guided by curiosity, carve paths no one else imagined existed. Are you ready to stop being just one more in the crowd and start seeing what others can't? Most people only see problems, obstacles, and limitations, while the curious see hidden opportunities in every detail. Pay close attention now. What sets great entrepreneurs, scientists, and leaders apart isn't just technical knowledge. It's the ability to look at the same situation everyone else sees and discover something entirely new. Curiosity turns barriers into hidden doors. When everyone says there's no solution, the curious ask, but what if there is? And it's in this simple act of questioning the impossible that revolutionary ideas, million-dollar businesses, and discoveries that change history are born. Think about Thomas Edison facing darkness. Thousands accepted living by candlelight, but he asked, what if I could create a controlled light? Think about Steve Jobs looking at giant computers. Everyone accepted they were only for a few, but he asked, what if everyone could have one in their pocket? The curious don't accept the world as it is. They imagine the world as it could be. And that imagination, fueled by questions, opens doors that seem invisible to ordinary eyes. Do you see the power in this? Curiosity isn't just a tool for learning. It's a lens that reveals opportunities most people ignore. That's why curious people thrive. While others complain about difficulty, they discover hidden treasures inside them. Now imagine looking at your own life. How many problems seem like insurmountable walls? But what if, instead of complaining, you asked, what can I learn here? What opportunity is hidden inside this? That simple shift in perspective can turn failures into springboards, losses into valuable lessons, and moments of crisis into seeds of wealth. The curious see doors where others only see walls, and those who walk through those doors reach places that only a few will ever have the courage to explore. Pay close attention now. Thinking differently from everyone else isn't a gift reserved for geniuses. It's a choice. Curiosity is the key that opens that door, but it takes courage to walk through it. Most people live trapped in repeated patterns. The same thoughts, the same explanations, the same solutions. But the curious break that cycle. They don't accept that's just the way it's always been. Instead, they dare to ask, what if it were another way? Now imagine something powerful. Everyone looks at a wall and sees only a limit. The curious one, instead of stopping, asks, what if I climb over it? What if I dig underneath? What if this wall is only an illusion? That simple mental exercise is what separates great innovators from the rest of the crowd. That's what it means to think differently. Not being content with the shell, but digging into the core. And you can train yourself to do this every single day. How? First, don't accept ready-made answers. Always ask, why is it this way? What would happen if it were the opposite? Second, question your own certainties. The most dangerous ideas are the ones you never dare to doubt. Third, simplify. If you can't explain something clearly, it means you don't truly understand it. This is the technique that allows anyone to learn quickly and even teach better than so-called experts who overcomplicate what should be simple. Do you see the power in this? Those who think like the majority get the same results as the majority, but those who think differently, guided by curiosity, discover shortcuts, create new solutions, and find hidden opportunities. The crowd runs in circles. The curious draw straight lines. toward the future. And now I ask you, are you willing to abandon the safety of following the crowd, to live the freedom of thinking for yourself? If you truly want to set yourself apart, you must turn curiosity into a daily discipline. Imagine this. Every day you wake up with a flame inside you, but if you don't feed that flame, it goes out. What keeps the greats ahead isn't occasional curiosity. It's living with it as a constant habit. Ask yourself, what didn't I understand today? What question was left unanswered? What can I investigate instead of just accepting? Practicing this daily creates a sharp mind, one capable of learning 10 times faster than average. Leonardo da Vinci made this a ritual. He wrote down questions, examined the simplest things, and broke down ideas until he truly understood them. You can do the same. Always carry a question notebook. Don't be afraid to write down doubts that seem silly. At the end of the day, choose one and go after the answer. This discipline creates a spiral of growth that never stops. Think about it. If every day you answered just one new question, in a year you'd have more than 300 answers most people never sought. And those answers become fuel for opportunities, better decisions, and bigger achievements. Curiosity is like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it gets. Turned out into routine, investigation into habit, questioning into a way of life. And remember, it's not about chasing perfect answers. It's about refusing to settle for the obvious. Those who cultivate curiosity every single day build a mind that cannot be stopped. Imagine with me something that could change the way you live forever. Every innovation, every breakthrough, every achievement that transformed the world began with a curious mind that refused to accept reality as it was. Pay close attention now. The curious don't wait for the future to arrive. They build it. It was curiosity that led explorers to cross unknown oceans, scientists to question dogmas, and entrepreneurs to reinvent markets. And it's curiosity that can lead you to create the future of your own life. While most people are content to repeat, the curious dare to imagine. While others wait, the curious take action. While others say it can't be done, the curious ask, how can it be done? That's the difference between those who merely survive and those who thrive. The curious not only learn more, they live more, because every day becomes a laboratory, every conversation an opportunity, every challenge an invitation to grow. Do you understand the power of this? If you choose to live with curiosity every single day, you will build a mind that cannot be imprisoned by routine, that is unshakable in the face of problems, and limitless when it comes to opportunities. Fortune doesn't belong to those who claim to know it all, but to those who never stop asking questions. Abundance doesn't come to those who fake certainty, but to those who are constantly in search of answers. So I want you to declare it right now, with courage. Leave a comment below. I will never stop asking why. Because that simple choice, repeated over and over, is the seed of an extraordinary life. Don't forget to like this video to support our work, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Remember, curiosity, you can't, can you? Maybe you got the first few. Maybe you got lucky with a couple more. But unless you've got some kind of photographic memory, that number is already gone from your brain. And here's the thing, in about 30 seconds, you won't even remember that I asked you to remember it. Okay, let that sink in. This is what we do to students, to employees, to ourselves. We cram information into our heads, hoping it'll stick. We highlight textbooks. We make flashcards. We repeat things over and over until we're sure we've got them memorized. And then what happens? A week later, it's gone. A month later, we can barely remember we even learned it. A year later, it might as well have never existed. But here's what's wild. Richard Feynman, one of the most brilliant minds in history, winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics, a man who revolutionized quantum mechanics, he barely memorized anything. Yeah, you heard that right. The guy who understood the universe at a level most of us can't even imagine. He didn't believe in memorization. And today I'm going to tell you why. Because once you understand this, once you see what Feynman saw, it will change everything about how you learn, how you think, and how you approach knowledge itself. Walk across stage A. So let me tell you a story. It's the 1940s. Feynman is at Princeton working on his PhD. And there's this tradition at Princeton where the physics grad students would challenge each other. They'd throw problems at each other. Difficult problems, obscure problems, the kind of stuff that required you to know formulas, constants, all sorts of technical details. And most students would prepare for these challenges by memorizing. They'd memorize the formulas. They'd memorize the constants. They'd memorize the solutions to common problems. Not Feynman. When someone would throw a problem at him, he wouldn't pull some memorized formula out of his back pocket. Instead, he'd sit there, think for a moment, and then derive what he needed from first principles. Right there, on the spot. Do you understand how insane that is? While everyone else was playing a memory game, Feynman was actually thinking. And here's what happened. He'd often get to the answer faster than the people who had memorized the formulas. Because he understood what he was doing. He wasn't searching through a mental filing cabinet. He was building the answer in real time from the ground up. His colleagues thought he was showing off, but he wasn't. He genuinely didn't see the point in memorizing things he could figure out. And this wasn't just some quirk of his personality. This was a fundamental insight about how knowledge actually works. Here's what most people don't understand. Memorization is not learning. They're not even related. They're completely different cognitive processes that happen to be shoved into the same category because our education system is fundamentally broken. Let me explain what I mean. When you memorize something, you're storing it in your brain's short-term memory. You're creating a fragile, temporary association between a question and an answer, between a word and a definition, between a problem and a solution. And that association, it's shallow. It's disconnected. It's like writing something on a post-it note and sticking it to your forehead. Sure, it's there, but it's not part of you. But when you understand something, when you truly understand it, you're not storing information. You're building connections. You're integrating new knowledge into existing frameworks. You're creating a web of understanding that's deep, flexible, and permanent. It's the difference between memorizing the words to a song in a language you don't speak and actually speaking that language. One is just sounds, the other is communication. Feynman understood this distinction better than almost anyone, and he built his entire approach to learning around it. Let me give you another example. This one's from later in his career. I share this story with energy if Feynman is at Los Alamos working on the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. And they're dealing with incredibly complex calculations. The kind of stuff where if you get one number wrong, you could cause a catastrophic accident. And there's this one physicist, brilliant guy, great credentials, who has memorized all the relevant equations. He can recite them perfectly. He knows all the constants. He's like a walking textbook. One day, someone asks him a question about neutron diffusion, and he rattles off the equation. Perfect, exactly right. And then Feynman asks him, but what does that equation actually mean? What's physically happening? Pause, the guy freezes. Because he doesn't know. He's memorized the equation, but he doesn't understand it. He can't visualize it. He can't explain what's actually happening with the neutrons. And this terrifies Feynman, because they're building a bomb, and this guy is making calculations that could kill people. But he doesn't actually understand what he's calculating. So Feynman starts pushing. What happens if we change this parameter? What if the geometry is different? What if we use a different material? And the physicist can't answer, because he only knows the equation for the specific case he memorized. He can't adapt. He can't think. He can only recite. Inside direct statement tease. This is the danger of memorization. It creates the illusion of knowledge without the substance of understanding. And it's everywhere. In schools, where students memorize for tests and forget everything the next week. In businesses, where people memorize processes without understanding why they work. In life, where we repeat advice we've heard without thinking about whether it actually applies to our situation. We've built an entire culture around memorization, and it's making us stupid. Walk to the other side now. You might be thinking, wait a minute. Aren't there some things you just have to memorize, like multiplication tables, or the periodic table, or people's names? A fair question. Let me address this head on. Feynman's position wasn't that you should never memorize anything. His position was that you should only memorize things after you understand them, and even then, only if you need to access them quickly. Let me break this down. Multiplication tables. Yeah, it's useful to know that 7 times 8 is 56. But here's the thing, you should learn that by understanding what multiplication actually is, by visualizing 7 groups of 8 objects, by seeing the pattern, by understanding the relationship. Once you understand it, the memorization happens naturally. You don't have to force it. Your brain automatically starts recognizing the pattern and retrieving it faster. But if you just drill 7 times 8 is 56, without understanding what that means, you're building a house on sand. The moment you need to do 7 times 9, or understand why 7 times 8 gives you that particular number, you're lost. Understand, point to audience, see the difference. Understanding first, memorization as a side effect. The periodic table, same thing. Feynman didn't memorize the periodic table, but he understood atomic structure so deeply that if you asked him about an element, he could tell you its properties based on where it sits in the table. He understood the why behind the what. People's names? Okay, that's different. That's pure memory because there's no logic to it. John could just as easily be called Steve. But even here, Feynman had a technique. He'd associate names with something meaningful. He'd create a story, a connection, a reason to remember. He'd turn arbitrary memory into understanding. Pause. The point is, smart people don't waste their mental energy on memorization. They invest it in understanding, because understanding is infinitely more powerful. Let me show you why. Get into teaching mode. Imagine you're trying to learn about World War II. You could memorize dates. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. D-Day, June 6th, 1944. V-Day, May 8th, 1945. And you know what? You could pass a test with that information. You could fill in the blanks. You could get a good grade. But do you understand World War II? No. You've got isolated facts floating in your head with no context, no connections, no meaning. Now imagine instead you understand the causes of the war, the geopolitical tensions, the economic factors, the rise of fascism, the consequences of World War I. Once you understand the story, the why behind the what, the dates become obvious. Of course, Pearl Harbor happened when it did. Of course, D-Day happened after years of preparation. Of course, the war in Europe ended before the war in the Pacific. Gesture, the dates aren't random facts to memorize. They're inevitable consequences of understanding the story. And here's the beautiful part. If you forget a date, you can reconstruct it from your understanding. But if you only memorize the date and you forget it, it's gone. You've got nothing. Understanding is robust. Memorization is fragile. Feynman knew this. That's why he spent his time building understanding, not stockpiling facts. They share this next story. There's this famous moment from one of Feynman's lectures at Caltech. He's teaching introductory physics, and he's explaining the concept of energy. Now, most physics teachers would define energy. They'd write the equation. They'd list the different types of energy. Kinetic, potential, thermal, chemical, nuclear. Students would dutifully write it all down and memorize it for the test. Not Feynman. Instead, he tells a story. He says, imagine a child is 28 blocks. And his mother, who's very methodical, knows that every evening when she puts him to bed, there should be 28 blocks in his room. But she comes in one evening and she only counts 27 blocks. Where's the missing block? She searches. Under the bed. No. In the toy box? No. Finally, she opens the window and looks outside, and there it is, 1 block in the garden. The next day, she counts again, 28 blocks. But then later, she counts only 26. Where are the missing 2 blocks? This time, the toy box is closed. She opens it. There are 2 blocks inside. The total is back to 28. Sometimes the blocks are in the room. Sometimes some are in the garden. Sometimes some are in the toy box, but the total number of blocks never changes. They just move around. Pausers, and then Feynman says, that's what energy is. It's like the blocks. It changes form. Sometimes it's motion, sometimes it's heat, sometimes it's light, but the total amount never changes. We can't see energy directly, just like the mother can't always see all the blocks. But we know it's there, and we know it's conserved. Well, let that land now. A student who heard that story doesn't need to memorize the law of conservation of energy. They understand it. They can visualize it. They can explain it to anyone. But a student who just memorized energy is conserved has nothing, just words, no understanding, no ability to apply it to new situations. This is what Feynman did. He turned everything into understanding. He never asked students to memorize. He gave them mental models, stories, ways of seeing the world that made memorization unnecessary. Get more intense. And here's what's crucial. This approach doesn't just work better for learning. It works better for everything. Think about your own life. When have you been most effective? When you were following memorized rules and procedures? Or when you actually understood what you were doing and why? When you understand something, you can adapt. You can improvise. You can handle unexpected situations. You can transfer your knowledge to new contexts. But when you've just memorized something, you're stuck. The moment reality doesn't match your memorized script, you're lost. I saw this constantly when I was teaching. Students would memorize procedures for solving certain types of math problems. And as long as the problems looked exactly like the examples, they were fine. But the moment I'd change the problem slightly, use different numbers, rearrange the question, apply the same concept in a new context, they'd panic. You didn't teach us this? But I had taught them. I'd taught them the concept. They just hadn't learned it. They'd memorized the surface without understanding the depth. Point out, and this is the tragedy of our education system. We've optimized for memorization because it's easy to test. Multiple choice, fill in the blanks, regurgitate the definition. But we've sacrificed understanding in the process. And we're creating generations of people who have lots of facts in their heads, but no idea what to do with them. Feynman fought against this his entire life. He refused to teach that way. He refused to learn that way. He refused to accept it as the standard. Let me tell you about the textbook incident. So share this with Building Energy. So Feynman gets asked to serve on the California State Board of Education. They want him to help evaluate science textbooks for schools. He figures, sure, he can help pick good books. How hard can it be? He gets the books. There are dozens of them, thick books, impressive looking, published by major education companies. And he starts reading. And the more he reads, the more horrified he becomes. The books are full of words, scientific sounding words, complex terminology, fancy diagrams. Everything looks very educational. But when Feynman actually tries to understand what the books are teaching, he realizes they're teaching nothing. There's one book that has an entire section on energy. Pages and pages about energy. It defines energy. It categorizes energy. It lists types of energy. Kinetic energy, potential energy, thermal energy, chemical energy. But nowhere does it explain what energy actually is. It never helps the student understand the concept. It just gives them words to memorize. Jet frustrated on stage, there's another book with a picture of a dog and a cat and a motorcycle. And the caption says, "Do you see any energy in this picture?" Feynman almost throws the book across the room, because energy isn't something you see. It's a concept, a measurement, a way of understanding how systems change. You can't point at a dog and say, "There's energy." But the book wants students to memorize that animals have energy and vehicles have energy, without understanding what that means. It's all memorization, no understanding, just meaningless words that students will dutifully repeat on tests and then forget. Feynman writes up his evaluation. He's scathing. He says these books are worse than useless. They're actively harmful. They're teaching students to sound smart without being smart. They're training kids to memorize without thinking. Pauses. And you know what happens? The committee ignores him. The books get approved anyway. Because the system doesn't actually care about understanding. It cares about the appearance of education. And that broke Feynman's heart. Slow down, get personal. But here's what I want you to understand. You don't have to accept that system. You don't have to learn that way. You don't have to operate that way. You can choose to understand instead of memorize. You can choose to think instead of regurgitate. You can choose to be like Feynman. And it's not even harder. It's actually easier. Let me show you what I mean. When you try to memorize something, you're fighting against your brain's natural tendencies. Your brain doesn't want to store arbitrary information. It's not good at it.
That's why memorization feels like work. That's why you have to keep reviewing things. That's why information leaks out of your head. But when you understand something, you're working with your brain's natural tendencies. Your brain loves patterns. It loves connections. It loves stories. It loves understanding. I get excited. That's why you can remember entire movies you've seen once, but you can't remember what you studied for 3 hours last night. The movie made sense. It had a story. It had connections. It had meaning. Your brain held onto it effortlessly. That's what understanding does. It turns learning from something you have to force into something that happens naturally. Feynman knew this. That's why he learned faster than almost anyone. Not because he had a better memory. He didn't. Because he built understanding, which is infinitely more efficient than building memory. Let me give you a practical example from my own life. Share personal story. I used to think I was bad at remembering names. I'd meet someone, they'd tell me their name, and 30 seconds later I'd forget it. It was embarrassing, so I tried all the memory tricks. Repeat the name 3 times. Associate it with someone famous. Create a mental image. None of it worked consistently. Then I learned Feynman's approach. Instead of trying to memorize names, I started trying to understand people. When I meet someone now, I don't just hear their name and try to remember it. I ask questions. Where are they from? What do they do? What are they interested in? I build a mental model of who they are. And suddenly, I don't forget names anymore. Not because I got better at memorization, but because the name becomes part of a rich context of understanding. The name isn't an arbitrary sound I have to remember. It's attached to a person I understand. That's the point. That's the power of understanding over memorization. It works even for things that seem like pure memory tasks. Now let me tell you what this looks like in practice. How do you actually learn through understanding instead of memorization? A teaching mode. First, ask why. Constantly. Don't accept information at face value. When someone tells you something, ask why is that true? What makes it work that way? What would happen if it were different? This is what Feynman did constantly. He drove people crazy with his questions. But those questions were how he built understanding. When a textbook says, like charges repel, don't just memorize it. Ask why. What's actually happening between those charges? What force is at work? Why does it work that way? When your boss says, we do it this way, don't just follow the procedure. Ask why. What's the goal? What problem is this solving? What would happen if we did it differently? A hard count points second explain it simply. This is the famous Feynman technique. If you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it. Try to explain concepts to someone who knows nothing about the subject. Better yet, try to explain them to a child. If you can do that, you understand. If you can't, you've only memorized. Third, connect it to what you already know. Your brain learns by connecting new information to existing knowledge. The more connections you make, the deeper your understanding. When you learn something new, ask, what does this remind me of? What principles have I seen before that apply here? How is this similar to or different from things I already understand? Feynman was a master at this. He'd connect physics to biology, math to art, science to everyday life. Everything was interconnected in his mind. Fourth, test yourself in new contexts. Don't just test whether you can recall information. Test whether you can apply it in new situations. If you think you understand supply and demand, can you explain why ticket prices for concerts work the way they do? If you understand evolution, can you explain why bacteria develop antibiotic resistance? If you understand management principles, can you apply them to coaching a sports team? If you can transfer the knowledge, you understand it. If you can only apply it in the exact context you learned it, you've just memorized, pause. These 4 practices, asking why, explaining simply, connecting to prior knowledge, and testing in new contexts, these will build genuine understanding. And once you have understanding, memorization becomes irrelevant. Let me tell you one more Feynman story that illustrates this perfectly. I tell this with admiration, and late in his career, Feynman gets invited to give a talk to a group of computer scientists. This is the early days of computing, and these folks are dealing with really complex problems about computation, algorithms, theory, and they're all using very technical language. Turing machines, complexity classes, computational complexity, the kind of jargon that takes years to learn. Feynman listens for a while, and then he raises his hand. I don't understand what you're saying, he admits. Can you explain it more simply? The speaker tries again, still using technical terms. Feynman stops him. No, simpler than that. Pretend I know nothing about computer science. What are you actually saying? I've paused, and you know what happens? The speaker struggles, because he'd memorized all the technical terms and concepts, but he hadn't really understood them deeply enough to explain them simply. Finally, after several attempts, the speaker manages to explain the concept in basic terms. And Feynman says, "Oh, so you're talking about this." And he describes the concept in even simpler terms, connecting it to basic logic and mathematics. And suddenly, everyone in the room understands better, including the original speaker. A point. This is what understanding looks like. The ability to cut through complexity and jargon to find the simple truth underneath. The ability to translate technical concepts into human language. The ability to see connections and patterns that others miss. You can't do that with memorization. You can only do that with understanding. Because get philosophical. Now I want to address something deeper. Because this isn't just about learning more efficiently. It's about something more fundamental. When you rely on memorization, you're outsourcing your thinking. You're letting someone else, the textbook author, the teacher, the expert, do the thinking for you. And you're just storing their conclusions. But when you build understanding, you're thinking for yourself. You're actively engaging with ideas. You're evaluating them. You're connecting them. You're making them your own. And this matters more than you might realize. For it slow down, we live in a world where information is everywhere. You can Google anything. You can ask AI anything. You can find an answer to any factual question in seconds. In this world, memorization is obsolete. It's a skill that made sense when information was scarce and hard to access. But now, it's pointless. What matters now is understanding. The ability to think clearly, the ability to evaluate information, the ability to see patterns and connections, the ability to solve novel problems. These are the skills that can't be outsourced to Google or AI. These are the skills that make you valuable. These are the skills that make you smart. And these are the skills that Feynman exemplified. Get passionate. He didn't know everything. He forgot things. He had to look things up. But when he engaged with a topic, he understood it at a level that most people never reach. And that's what made him brilliant. Not his memory, his understanding. I'll give you one final example that drives this home. I build to this story. Near the end of his life, Feynman was diagnosed with cancer. He knew he was dying, and someone asked him if he had any regrets about his career. He said no. He'd had a wonderful time. He'd played with ideas. He'd explored. He'd understood. But then he mentioned one thing that bothered him. He said he was frustrated that he'd spent time on some problems that turned out to not be that important. Problems that other physicists had said were crucial, but that he'd worked on without really questioning whether they mattered. Oh, pause. I should have trusted my own understanding more, he said. I should have thought more carefully about what problems actually mattered instead of just following what everyone else said was important. Even at the end of his life, what bothered him wasn't that he hadn't memorized enough. It was that he hadn't understood enough, that he hadn't thought deeply enough, that he hadn't trusted his own understanding enough. Contra direct addressee. And this is what I want you to take away from this. The goal isn't to have more facts in your head. The goal is to understand more deeply, to think more clearly, to see the world more accurately. Memorization gets you facts. Understanding gets you wisdom. Memorization makes you a walking encyclopedia. Understanding makes you a thinker. Memorization lets you answer questions. Understanding lets you ask better questions. Let's walk to center stage. So here's my challenge to you. Stop trying to memorize things, seriously. Stop. The next time you're learning something, don't ask, how do I remember this? Ask, how do I understand this? Don't highlight, don't make flashcards. Don't repeat things until they stick. Instead, ask questions. Make connections. Explain it to someone. Test it in new contexts. Build understanding, not memory. And watch what happens. You'll learn faster. You'll retain more. You'll be able to apply knowledge in ways you never could before. You'll become smarter. Not because you have more information, but because you understand more deeply. This is what Feynman did. This is why he was brilliant. Not because he was born with some special brain, but because he chose understanding over memorization.
every single day, and you can make that same choice, starting right now. Look directly at audience. Think about something you're trying to learn right now, something you've been memorizing or trying to memorize, and ask yourself, do I actually understand this? Could I explain it to a 10-year-old? Could I apply it in a completely different context? Do I know why it's true? Not just that it's true. If the answer is no, then stop memorizing. Start understanding, ask why. Make connections. Explain it simply. Test it in new ways. Do the work of thinking instead of the work of memorizing. It might feel harder at first. Understanding requires more active engagement than memorization, but it's worth it, because understanding lasts. Understanding grows. Understanding makes you powerful. Memorization just makes you temporarily informed. Feynman once said, "I'd rather have questions I can't answer than answers I can't question." That's the attitude of someone who values understanding over memorization. Someone who knows that real intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about being able to think. Be that person. Don't memorize. Understand. Don't store information. Build wisdom. Don't be a hard drive. Be a processor. Sir, final pause. Thank you. Feynman beat and if this changed how you think about learning, if you're ready to stop memorizing and start understanding, do me a favor. Like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're exploring how one of history's greatest minds actually thought, and how you can apply those same principles to become a better thinker yourself. Join us. Let's choose understanding over memorization. Let's learn the way Feynman learned. See you in the next one.
Spring 1947. A 30-year-old physicist sits alone in a Cornell cafeteria, watching a student toss a plate in the air. The plate wobbles as it spins. Something about the way it moves catches his attention. He pulls out a napkin and starts calculating the relationship between the wobble and the rotation. 3 years later, that napkin calculation becomes the foundation for a Nobel Prize. But the path from a spinning plate to Stockholm reveals something most people get catastrophically wrong about genius. This story comes directly from Feynman's documented accounts in Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, and his 1965 Nobel lecture, corroborated by Hans Bethe and other Cornell colleagues who witnessed this period. What happened in that cafeteria wasn't a sudden inspiration. It was the resolution of a crisis that nearly destroyed Feynman's career before it began. October 1945. Feynman leaves Los Alamos after helping build the atomic bomb. He accepts a prestigious position at Cornell University, recruited personally by Hans Bethe. On paper, everything looks perfect. In reality, Feynman is dying inside. His wife Arlene died of tuberculosis just months before Hiroshima. He's 27 years old and already feeling like a fraud. The war work consumed him with urgent problems that mattered. Now he's supposed to sit in an office and think about theoretical physics for no reason, except that universities expect it. He later described this period with brutal honesty. "I couldn't do anything. I was completely depressed. The pressure builds daily. Cornell hired him as a rising star. They're paying him. They're waiting for brilliance. He sits at his desk trying to care about physics problems and feels nothing. The intrinsic joy that once made him solve puzzles for hours has vanished, replaced by obligation and expectation. He attends seminars and feels like an imposter. He reviews papers and finds them meaningless. The harder he tries to force productivity, the more paralyzed he becomes. This continues for months. Colleagues start noticing. Bethe checks in, concerned but patient. Feynman considers quitting physics entirely. He's burned out in the exact sense modern knowledge workers understand, trapped in the gap between external expectations and internal motivation. But something else is happening beneath the surface that he doesn't recognize yet. Then one afternoon in the cafeteria, a student throws a plate in the air, just horsing around. The plate wobbles and rotates as it flies. Feynman watches it and notices something strange. The medallion on the plate, the Cornell emblem, seems to rotate faster than the plate wobbles. Is that real or an optical illusion? He has no reason to care. This isn't important physics. It won't advance his career. It won't justify Cornell's investment in him. But for the first time in months, he feels curious. He goes back to his office and starts calculating. Not because he should, not because anyone asked, because he wants to know the answer. He works out the equations for a wobbling plate. The relationship between the wobble rate and the rotation rate emerges. The wobble is twice as fast as the rotation. The mathematics is straightforward, elegant. He feels something he hasn't felt since before the war. Pure pleasure in figuring something out for no purpose except that it's interesting. Excited, he finds Hans Bethe in the hallway. "I've figured out the wobbling plate," Feynman says, and explains the 2-to-1 ratio. Bethe listens politely, then asks the obvious question. "What's the importance of this? Why are you doing it?" It's the question Feynman has been asking himself for months, the question that's been paralyzing him. But this time, his answer is different. He tells Beth, "There's no importance whatsoever. I'm just doing it for the fun of it." Bethe shrugs and walks away. For anyone else, that response might have been crushing. Cornell didn't hire Feynman to play with cafeteria plates, but something shifts in that moment. Feynman makes a decision that will define his entire career. He later wrote, "I'm going to play with physics whenever I want to, without worrying about any importance whatsoever." The transformation isn't instant, but it's real. He starts following curiosity without justification. A problem strikes him as interesting, he works on it. A calculation seems fun, he does it. The spinning plate leads him to think about electron orbits. That's arbitrary, there's no logical connection, but the plate rotation reminds him of electron spin, so he starts playing with those equations. The electron work leads him back to old problems in quantum electrodynamics he had abandoned as too difficult. But now, he's not approaching them as important career-defining challenges. He's approaching them as puzzles. Over the following months, the playful calculations compound. The quantum electrodynamics problems that seemed impenetrable when he was trying to force solutions become tractable when he's exploring them for joy. He develops new mathematical techniques without worrying whether they're publishable. He follows tangents that don't make sense. And slowly, piece by piece, he reconstructs quantum theory in an entirely new way. This wasn't just about burnout recovery. This was about a fundamental misunderstanding that destroys most talented people before they achieve anything remarkable. The misunderstanding works like this. Society teaches us that important work feels like work. Significant achievements require discipline, sacrifice, forcing yourself through resistance. The path to excellence is paved with obligation. You identify valuable problems, then motivate yourself to solve them through willpower and responsibility. This logic sounds reasonable. It's completely backwards. What Feynman discovered in that cafeteria was that the causality runs the opposite direction. The spinning plate wasn't important, which is exactly why it was important. By removing the pressure of significance, he reconnected with the intrinsic motivation that makes sustained excellence possible. He didn't decide to work on quantum electrodynamics and then force himself to care. He played with physics until the play naturally led him to quantum electrodynamics, at which point it wasn't work anymore. The distinction matters desperately. When you force yourself to work on important problems, you're operating on willpower, which depletes. You can sustain it for hours, maybe days, occasionally weeks, but not the months and years required for genuinely difficult breakthroughs. Feynman spent 2 years in that post-war depression, trying to will himself into productivity. It didn't work because it couldn't work. Willpower is a terrible engine for creative intellectual work. But when you follow curiosity, when you work on problems because they genuinely interest you in the moment, you tap into a renewable resource. Feynman spent the next 40 years doing physics not because he should, but because he couldn't help himself. The difference in output is exponential. His Nobel Prize-winning work on quantum electrodynamics emerged directly from that spinning plate play. His work on liquid helium, quantum computing, nanotechnology, all of it flowed from the same principle. Follow what fascinates you right now. Trust that significance will emerge. Here's where it gets deeper. Feynman didn't just discover that play leads to productivity. He discovered why conventional approaches to important work create the opposite of what they intend. When you label something as important, your brain activates threat response systems. You start worrying about failure, judgment, wasted resources, reputation. These systems evolve to keep you alive, not to make you creative. They narrow your focus, make you risk-averse, trigger perfectionism and procrastination. You freeze, exactly as Feynman froze at Cornell. The paradox is that by removing importance, by treating quantum electrodynamics as no more significant than a wobbling plate, Feynman lowered his psychological stakes enough to actually think clearly. The play wasn't a vacation from real work. The play was how real work happens. He later said, "Physics is like sex. Sure, it may give some practical results, but that's not why we do it." This principle extends far beyond physics. The same pattern destroys knowledge workers across every field. You identify an important career goal, a significant project, a problem that matters. Then you try to force yourself to work on it. You create accountability systems, deadlines, motivation techniques. The more important the problem, the more resistance you feel. The more resistance you feel, the more you conclude you need better discipline. You're solving the wrong problem. The issue isn't insufficient willpower. The issue is that importance triggers psychological mechanisms that make genuine creative work impossible. The solution isn't to abandon ambition or reject responsibility. The solution is to engineer situations where the work you find intrinsically fascinating happens to align with valuable outcomes. Feynman didn't stop caring about physics. He stopped caring about whether any particular piece of physics was important. That subtle shift changed everything. Consider your own experience. Remember a project where you got completely absorbed, where hours vanished and you couldn't stop thinking about it even when you tried. That wasn't discipline. That was intrinsic motivation. Now, remember a project where you knew you should work on it, where it was important for your career or income or reputation, but you kept procrastinating and forcing yourself forward. Same person, same brain, opposite results. The difference wasn't the difficulty of the work. The difference was whether you cared about the work itself or about the consequences of the work. Most career advice tells you to identify valuable skills and force yourself to develop them. Feynman's spinning plate reveals why that fails. You can't sustain forced effort long enough to achieve expertise. Instead, you need to find the intersection between what fascinates you and what produces value, then trust yourself to stay there. That sounds risky, like giving up control. But the alternative, trying to power through years of resistance on willpower alone, is what actually fails. The modern knowledge economy makes this even more critical. Information work has no physical constraints forcing you to stay productive. No one watches you think. You can spend 8 hours at a desk accomplishing nothing, and no one knows until results don't materialize months later. In this environment, intrinsic motivation isn't optional. It's the only reliable engine. Companies that understand this stop trying to motivate employees through carrots and sticks, and instead design conditions where people encounter genuinely interesting problems. The best careers aren't built by identifying lucrative fields and forcing yourself to excel. They're built by following curiosity until you accidentally become one of the few people who deeply understand something valuable. Feynman's later career validates this completely. He never took another project because it seemed important. When Caltech recruited him, he negotiated unusual freedom to pursue whatever interested him. When NASA asked him to investigate the Challenger disaster, he agreed not because space policy mattered to his career, but because he was curious about the technical details. He investigated by himself, talked to engineers instead of administrators, ran his own experiments, and discovered the O-ring problem that NASA was hiding. Then he insisted on including his findings even when the commission tried to suppress them. None of that would have happened if he was optimizing for career importance. It happened because he was following curiosity. The spinning plate principle also explains why so many talented people plateau early. They achieve initial success through some combination of ability and effort, then conclude they should double down on whatever worked. They professionalize, they optimize for visible metrics, they take on responsibility and importance, and they stop playing. The play was the engine generating the success they're trying to scale. By removing it, they guarantee stagnation. You see this everywhere. Researchers who stop doing actual research to manage labs. Writers who stop exploring to build platforms. Entrepreneurs who stop building to manage. They're all trying to preserve success by abandoning the mechanism that created it. The counter-argument is that play seems irresponsible. You have bills, obligations, people depending on you. You can't just do whatever interests you. But notice what actually happened with Feynman. By following the spinning plate, he became far more valuable to Cornell, far more productive, far more respected than he would have been by forcing himself through obligation. The play produced more of what everyone wanted from him. That's generally true. The market values rare, deep expertise. Deep expertise comes from sustained engagement. Sustained engagement requires intrinsic motivation. Therefore, the play isn't opposed to market value. It's the path to it. What matters is distinguishing between pleasure-seeking and curiosity-following. Pleasure-seeking is checking social media, binging television, any activity designed to produce dopamine without effort. Curiosity-following is engaging with questions that genuinely perplex you, even when the engagement is difficult. Feynman's plate calculation required work. He had to derive equations, check mathematics, think carefully. But it was effortless in the sense that he wanted to do it. That's the distinction. Intrinsic motivation doesn't make things easy. It makes difficult things sustainable. The tragedy is that most people never discover their spinning plate. They spend entire careers trying to care about what they think they should care about, wondering why discipline and motivation techniques don't work. They never try the other path. Pay attention to what naturally captures their curiosity. Follow it obsessively without justification. Trust that value will emerge. The risk feels enormous. What if you follow curiosity and discover nothing valuable? But the alternative, forcing yourself through decades of resistance, has already failed. Feynman died in 1988. His last words reportedly were, "I'd hate to die twice. It's so boring." Even terminal cancer couldn't make him pretend significance where he felt none. That consistency, that lifelong commitment to only doing what genuinely interested him, produced some of the 20th century's most important physics. The importance was a side effect. The curiosity was the point. The spinning plate that changed physics forever wasn't special. Any plate would have worked. What mattered was that Feynman gave himself permission to care about it without justification. That permission created space for genius to emerge. You likely have a spinning plate somewhere in your life right now, some problem or question that fascinates you for no good reason. The question isn't whether it's important. The question is whether you're brave enough to follow it anyway. What would happen if you stopped trying to care about what you should care about and started paying attention to what you actually care about? Feynman found out. The answer changed everything.